Welcome to HECTV's live interactive program that's part of St. Louis.
The whole production is pulled together.
It's going to be a steel bridge.
The way the cockpit is designed.
The highest rated green building in the world.
Welcome to HECTV Live.
Today we're here to join the actors from the Metro Theater Company production of Battledrum and of course experts from the Missouri History Museum as well to talk about the Civil War and the nature of today's program. Drummer Boys, Battledrum, the Civil War, part of our Inside the Artist Studio series. Hi everybody, I'm Tim Gore, your host for HECTV Live, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the stage here of the auditorium, the theater at the Missouri History Museum for our program today as we look at some information about the Civil War in Missouri, about Drummer Boys, and of course about the Metro Theater Company production of Battledrum. As I said, we're talking about Drummer Boys, Battledrum, and the Civil War. And the reason we're at the Missouri History Museum is because this is where, of course, Metro Theater Company's production of Battledrum, a play written by Doug Cooney, music by Lee Allen, is being performed. And they just opened with student matinees this week, but they're going throughout the month of January. So if you're in the St. Louis area, you obviously want to come and watch the production. If you're out of the St. Louis area, then you're going to find out more about it by going to their website and by going to Missouri History Museum website, which we'll share with you throughout the program. We're going to start, though, by talking a little bit about the Civil War in Missouri and this fantastic exhibition of the Civil War in Missouri that is currently running here at the Missouri History Museum. To share that information with us, we're going to meet Daniel Gonzalez, Program Coordinator from the Missouri History Museum. Daniel, come in. Welcome. Thanks so much for being with us again.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Good to be here. So, first and foremost, give the folks an idea. If they were to come to the History Museum right now, there's an exhibition called Civil War in Missouri. Absolutely. What's the focus? What's the idea? What do you want to get across here?
With the Civil War in Missouri exhibition, we really want to highlight the unique aspects of the war within the state. The war in Missouri was really a war of no quarter. Every man, woman, child, regardless of age or experience, were all brought into this really chaotic and pivotal period in American history. And we want that to come through in the exhibition.
And what are the kinds of things that people would see in the exhibition?
Sure. We're going to be highlighting the full story from the early period as tensions begin to build around the issue of slavery through kind of these events that spark the war, through the events that happen in St. Louis at Camp Jackson, and the major battles. But more than that, we want to talk about the individual stories, the experiences of the individuals on the ground.
And we're going to start with what you just mentioned, the activity at Camp Jackson. Okay. We've got an image of that, of Camp Jackson that we can bring up. That's slide number 2, the Camp Jackson lithograph. And as we look at this, Daniel, let's talk a little bit about Camp Jackson. That's just south of St. Louis?
It took place where St. Louis University is now.
Okay.
It was known as Lindell Grove at the time. And at Lindell Grove, you had a mustering of Missouri militia. This was unique from other Missouri militias mustering because of the tensions of the time period. There was great tension around these sectional issues. South Carolina had seceded. Its issue of secession was at the forefront of everyone's mind. The other thing that was happening at Camp Jackson is the people there were very much oriented towards secession. The streets of the actual muster were named after Confederate generals. And there were strong suspicions that weapons from the South had been smuggled in. And they were positioning themselves, theoretically, to try and take control of the St. Louis Arsenal, which was the largest cache of weapons west of the Mississippi. If you could control that, you could control the state. So the Union forces in St. Louis were going to do what they could to prevent that from happening. And they actually captured Camp Jackson. They took Union troops, rather, who had been mustered in from St. Louis and captured Camp Jackson. After that capture, which was a peaceful capture, they marched those troops back through the city. As they're marching back through the city, mobs begin to form for a couple reasons. The German element of these Union troops produce anti-German sentiment in St. Louis, and also there was a feeling that the federal government was usurping the role of the Missouri government. So as they're marching back, all of these troops, this mob forms, rocks are being thrown, things are being yelled, and someone on one of the sides, either the Union troops or the mob, fires a shot. We don't know exactly who, but the end result was almost 30 dead. This really catastrophic event.
And this is occurring in 1861.
That's right. This is occurring in 1861.
A lot of people may not be aware of the fact that Missouri is actually a hotbed of all sorts of Civil War activity. Another important battle that happens pretty early on is the battle at Wilson's Creek. I know that's
right.
highlighted in the exhibition.
It is, and one of the things we want to talk about with Wilson's Creek is this is the moment where people in Missouri kind of realize this is going to be a long, bloody, and protracted war. The level of casualties at the Battle of Wilson's Creek is shocking. And they realize that they're not ready. And so it really inspires the creation of several organizations, the Western Sanitary Commission, chief among them, to care for orphaned, wounded, and widowed individuals.
Well, you mentioned wounded.
Yes.
We've got an image of a surgical set that we want to show everybody, because one of the scenes that you're going to see later in the show is from the production of Battledrum, and you're going to actually get to meet General Cutter, and by that nurse's name you probably have an idea about what General Cutter might do. But this is an actual surgical set from Civil War time period. These are the lovely medical tools that they would have been using, and what I'm seeing in the middle looks perilously close to a hacksaw.
Yes, this is actually a bone saw. This would have been used to assist with amputations, as with many of the tools in this kit. You have forceps and a thing called a teneculum hook. All of these kind of gruesome tools, but they were used to accomplish an end on the battlefield, really to save people's lives.
Think about that image, students, as we see that scene later with General Cutter, and those are the tools, those are the surgical instruments that she would be using during a battle scene. So we also want to talk a little bit in historic context about youth in the Civil War, because obviously the nature of Battledrum is about drummer boys, young people's involvement in the Civil War. And you've got a lot of images with this exhibition that do that. Let's go through some of those now. We start with a picture of a young man named James Johnston.
Yes. Jimmy Johnston was a 6.5-year-old. His father served aboard the gunboat, the Forest Rose. He was actually visiting his father on that gunboat along the Mississippi, and this was in 1864. And what he encountered was an attack by Confederate forces on that boat. At some point during the battle, the powder boy who had been taking powder stores to the guns was shot and killed. At 6.5 years old, Jimmy Johnston takes over that role. In the heat of battle, we can only imagine what that would have been like, and the courage that he displayed. And because of his help and the courage of the people on board, they were able to deter the Confederate attack and were victorious. After the battle, the people on board the boat were so amazed with Jimmy's courage, they kind of dubbed him Admiral Jimmy, and they made a uniform for him.
And that's what we're going to see next?
Yes, yes.
Okay, and this uniform is in the exhibition?
This uniform is in the exhibition. It's a naval uniform complete with quartermaster insignia, and it's made for a 6.5-year-old.
Oh my gosh. Now we also have another image. This is a painting of a young man named George Mepham. Am I saying his last name right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and George looks like he's at an army camp here. There's tents in the background.
Yeah, so this is a painting that was commissioned by George's parents, actually. And what we wanted to get across by talking about George is that the war kind of reshaped how children were playing, reshaped their entire lives. George was not a child soldier, but he had this uniform made by his parents. It's in a different style. It's in the style of the Zouave uniform, which was modeled after the French light artillery in North Africa. But many Union and Confederate troops wore these uniforms. And in the summer of 1860 in St. Louis, one of those units actually came to the city and performed and showed their military prowess. And it's likely that George was inspired by that and excited by that and asked his parents to make him that uniform.
And another youthful image we want everybody to see is of Private Elijah Madison.
Elijah Madison is not a child, but he wasn't a child. He was an African-American troop, actually. And that's one of the things that we wanted to highlight is the contributions of African-Americans to the war effort. Elijah Madison escaped slavery in St. Louis County, joined the Union Army at Benton Barracks, and served throughout the country in the 64th United States Colored Troops, which was one of many colored troop units that came from the state of Missouri.
I think those examples are really, really interesting because when you get a chance to talk to Doug Cooney in a bit and the actors about the play, you're going to notice that those three kind of characters that we highlight there visually from the exhibition are actually the characters that form the major part of this production here. You've got a young man from the north who is indeed willing to be part of the army. You've got a young man from the south who becomes part of the battle when the war comes to him. And then you've got an African-American young man who's fleeing via the Underground Railroad and then becomes part of the army effort as well. So those images goes perfectly with what you guys are going to have the chance to talk about later on. Let's see what questions you have for Daniel right now as we talk in terms of the Civil War in Missouri and young people's involvement in the war. Bryan, Ohio, I'm going to go to you guys.
This is Paige.
How does someone who's producing this play bring the audience back in time so that they can share the emotions of the protagonist?
Oh, Paige, that's a fantastic question. I'm going to hold it for just a minute because that's specifically for Carol North. We're going to meet in a minute about the nature of the production of the play and that kind of thing. We'll come to that question. Do you guys at Bryan have a question right now for Daniel about the war itself or about the use of young people in the war, a historic question, and then we'll go to the next one. Bryan, I'll go back to you guys. A question about the historic context of the war at this point?
How were drummer boys treated by the actual army men?
Linda, thanks for that question, because there's a lot of reasons to ask that, because obviously drummer boys were much younger. How were they treated by the rest of the soldiers?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question, Linda. I think you find that the experience of drummer boys it varied depending on where they were, when they were there. But overall, I think there would have been a overriding feeling that drummer boys were, since they were younger, that they would have been seen as somebody who needed care, and possibly superior officers would have seen them as people who they could have been father figures for and help them in the absence of their own parents.
And of course, they're of course exceptionally important to the war effort because the drummer boys are giving the signals that are going to enable the soldiers to do what they're supposed to do properly. Though there's a wonderful scene in the play where they have a song and the drummer boy sings about the fact that the soldiers don't necessarily like him all that much, though, because he's the one who has to wake them up in the morning and send them off to battle and all those kinds of things. So it might have been a double-edged sword in that way. So talk a little bit about the drums, the size, the scale, those kinds of things.
Sure. So each company would have had two musicians, usually a drummer and a fifer. And this drum that you see here is one of the most common types used. It's a rope tension snare drum, but they use other drums, other types of drums. There's a bass drum sometimes. But this particular drum was used by William Streeter, who before the war was a sign maker in St. Louis. When the war broke out, he joined a militia unit, and later, where this drum is from, is his service in the Enrolled Missouri Militia, which was a militia unit inside of the state of Missouri that was created specifically to deal with insurgencies inside of the state, these massive number of guerrillas that operated, wreaking havoc, blowing up bridges, burning houses, cutting telegraph lines, just pillaging, essentially. And so they were created in order to deal specifically with that targeted threat.
Well, folks, if you have the chance to be in the St. Louis area between now and when does the exhibition end?
It ends in 2013.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, you've got lots of time to get to St. Louis and see it. Then you want to come to Forest Park, obviously, to the Missouri History Museum. And you can see all sorts of artifacts of the exhibition online at mohistory.org. And then you also have a blog, Daniel, if I'm remembering correctly. History Happens Here?
Yeah, historyhappenshere.org. And also specifically targeted to the Civil War exhibition, we have a website, www.civilwarmo.org.
Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks
if you guys have more questions for Daniel, we'll bring him back at the end of the show for more historic information. Dan, thanks so much for being here. I'll let you exit. You're looking at the set from Battledrum, and obviously the set is here because this is where Metro Theater Company's performing it. And now you're going to have the chance to meet the woman, so to speak, who's brought it all to life. Carol North, the artistic director of Metro Theater Company. Carol, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Great. Always a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, it's always great to have you here.
Thank you.
Well, let's start with a question from the students because Paige, if I'm remembering correctly, in Bryan, Ohio, Paige, I hope I've remembered your name correctly. Your question would be a great way for us to start talking to Carol about the play. So let's go back to Bryan. Paige, let's ask your question again.
All right. How does someone who's producing this play bring the audience back so that they can understand the emotions of the protagonist?
Yeah. Paige, what a great question you've asked. First of all, you look for a really great play, and that's what Doug Cooney gave us. He has created characters that are not cutouts from history. They're real human beings. He's given them dialogue, which brings us to the present moment. That's what drama does. And he's revealed things about their emotions, and I think that's the part that hooks us in as an audience, that helps us identify. So the protagonist, whose name is Rufus, is a kid who's caught at the very beginning of the play. Before he says anything, we see his desperation as his farm is burned to the ground. He's confused. He has no idea where to go. The Union soldiers who are ransacking his place trap him, they torment him. It's a very cruel scene, but I think from the get-go in the production, we feel for him because he's in such a dangerous situation.
Well, what attracted you to the play? I mean, why choose to pick it? It's not exactly lighthearted subject matter, Carol.
It's not, but it's so exciting. It touched my heart. You know, those opening images of the play, even though I was just reading the words on the script, it hooked me. It made me care about the characters. It delivers so many threads of this great big story of the Civil War. I loved the characters. I found touches of humor in the piece and a kind of tension that's just unrelenting. It grabbed me. I wanted to do it.
Then let's continue the conversation by inviting the playwright in, since he's with us today, Doug Cooney, the playwright of Battledrum. Doug, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I'll have you just slide over to Carol's right there. Will be absolutely perfect. So Doug's in St. Louis, and you just saw a production of it this morning with the matinee performance, right? And this is the second time Battledrum has been performed, correct?
Yes, it was performed, well, it was commissioned and premiered by the Eckerd Theater Company out of Clearwater, Florida.
Give the students a little bit of idea about where this play came from. I had the chance to both hear you this morning and also read in the liner notes of the program where the idea came from. I think it's fantastic.
Well, I was working for Los Angeles Master Chorale, and we had this program where we would go into classrooms, 5th grade classrooms, and write songs based on chapters of history. And we happened to be writing about the Civil War, and there was a group of boys who were writing a song about Civil War drummer boys. But I sort of suspected that they hadn't done their homework or research, so I went ahead and did it. And I came back to them and I said, well, you know, it was kind of cool to be a drummer boy, except they got shot in battle, and they had a big job, but if the other army wanted to throw that platoon into chaos, they just aim at the little boy with the big drum, pop. And the little boy's face went white, you know, and I said, yeah, so it was a hard job. Why, if you were a drummer boy, what would keep you playing the drum? And he said, because the drum makes the fear disappear. And I thought, oh, it's a great, you know, the kids have so much more wisdom about these things than we do necessarily. And it was a great lyric. And so I took the idea and put it in my hip pocket, thinking if I get a chance someday to write a play about Civil War drummer boys, I would want to do it. And then I got the opportunity.
And we hear that lyric in the play very specifically.
Yeah, it lives.
In a variety of ways. Well, one of the questions I want to ask you deals with the addition of the music. Because, you know, it's the Civil War. It's a serious subject matter. And I don't think this is a musical at all. It's a play with music.
Correct.
We see it performed in my mind. What about the musical element was important to you? Why did you want to bring that into the production? Why not just straight staples?
Well, you know, because it was about drums, those drums were going to be part of it. And as soon as you put drums on stage, it creates, it asks for music. But because, and Carol gets this, because it's such a dark subject matter, because war looms in it and it's not necessarily, it's going to end badly. As a dramatist, you try and elevate the scenes in the story with as much comedy and humor and life and vitality as you can, so that when the story starts playing for keeps, you've got I call it the old Irish way. You get the audience laughing and enjoying it and feeling the characters and enjoying their company, and then you like punch them in the guts.
And it comes across beautifully that way in the performance.
Thank you.
So kudos to both playwright and to production company.
Thank you, Doug.
Let's see what questions you have for Doug and Carol about the nature of the show. I'm going to go back to Bryan, Ohio.
Do you feel a lot of pressure to create almost perfect replication of the scenes, considering the audience may have war background and may be judging the play's realism?
Oh, that's an interesting question, and one I think is great for us to talk about in terms of the theatrical nature of the production, the realistic nature of war. Balance that for us.
Yes. Well, this is a play, and I think that gives us a lot of liberty to certainly to march to the drum that Doug has given us. That's my primary job, is to honor the script and to investigate those characters and give them grounding and make them real and compelling. But that's different from doing historical reenactment, for instance. There are Civil War reenactors who do exactly that. And they research every button and collar of uniforms to make sure that it's specifically authentic. This is an interpretation. The characters are inspired by research that Doug did in history, but they are fictional characters that came from his imagination. And my job then is to bring that forward on stage.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that research. You read journals, diaries, letters, you looked up information about the Civil War. That was an email question that just came to us.
Yes, I was both blessed with research, and I was also prevented from doing too much research because we had a rehearsal deadline and performance deadline. And writers, playwrights, can get completely lost in research and never get around to just nailing the story down. So watching it, even this morning, watching it, I could hear like, oh, I remember when I read that, and I remember where that came from. And because I had to work so fast, I was grabbing at anything that was juicy or had potential and packing it into the play as quickly as I could. So there were a few moments this morning when I heard lines that stuck out to me, like, oh, there's one particular line that came up again this morning in the Q&A about you don't want to be friends with the drummer boy because it ends badly. And I did come across journal entries that were from platoon leaders saying that they advised their soldiers not to treat the drummer boys as though they were like kid brothers or siblings, because we're soldiers here and we have a job to do. And if we lose a drummer boy, we don't want the platoon saddened by that loss to any particular degree, because they'd have to move on.
In the play, the notes indicate what about the set? It's like supposed to, like not any specific location, they're just like on the road, you know, rootless, I remember.
Yeah, it's very sparse description. Partly, and Carol understands this, that when you write for young audiences, you write plays that you know will pick up and move and be performed in a number of different spaces. You won't necessarily have the full benefit as a theater as we do here. And so you try to write the play to give the director and the designers some room to put their creativity into it. And this play particularly, I know that when I laid it down on paper, I tried to describe it with a certain sparsity, but also some of that, the richness that the Civil War has in our culture. So because it was fought on back roads and ramshackle houses and in barren fields, I knew that the scenes would have a certain sameness, but we'd need to move it along somehow. So, and Carol did this really well, because each time the scene began, you had a feeling that you were further down the road.
Before I ask you your interpretation of the set or how this came about, I want to go to our students in Bryan, Ohio. Bryan, you're seeing the set now. You see the cross flags, the Confederate flag, the American flag, you see the drums, you see the nature of the ramps, etc. Give us your ideas about the set. Does it seem to depict a rootless area? What do you like the flags? You know, what are your responses to just looking at the physical space?
I think it makes sense because they're constantly moving during the Civil War, and so it's scarce and there's not much there. And it just shows that they can get up and leave anytime.
Thanks. That's a very interesting point and a very good one to make. And did another young lady have a thought as well? I thought I saw someone else moving toward the microphone.
I loved how there were some lighting effects and some gobos that were splashing on the raked part of the stage and the different platforms. And I was just wondering if you have those changing throughout the actual show or whether you keep those pretty constant.
The lighting designer had a big role to play once we moved into the theater. And as Doug said, this takes place over many different spaces, a lot of different geographies, but also day and night. We march by day, we pitch camp by night, always very transient. Everything that the infantry had with them, they were carrying. So we have scenes where we know it's the night before the battle, and the lighting designer gave us a lot of shadows. Although in the shadows we want to be able to see the actors. And then the next morning, as they're getting ready for battle very early, you know, the light kind of rises. There's a very dramatic effect at the climax of the story where the first drummer boy is shot. And this whole wall behind the flags goes blood red. It's kind of a shocking, wonderful moment. So light had a lot to do with bringing it alive in the theater.
We're going to let you see one of the scenes from the play in just a moment, but I want to go back to the young man in Bryan. What was your question, sir?
I was going to ask the playwright if the characters are provided a backstory or if they're revealed indirectly.
Your characters in a play always have copious backstory. In fact, at lunch, I was telling Carol what happened to George Washington before he shows up in the play. But what the audience gets to see in the play are very carefully selected moments. Sometimes they echo of a greater life that the playwright may understand, or the actors might have their own interpretation of what the backstory is. But you're only sharing with the audience certain elements of it. It's interesting that there are very few props in the play, but I knew that the drums would be an important plot point, and I also wrote into the script some of the history of the drum. And I read in my research that drummer boys would often paint checkerboards on the face of the drum so that they could play games. So I knew as a dramatist that one of the scenes would have to take place while they were actually playing a game, and to weave that into the scene so that the gamesmanship as to who's winning that game or not has something to do with what's happening between the characters. I invented that they wrote the name of the drum on the side of the drum, and that had to do with the history of a character you never even meet in the play. And that's Bobby Tibbetts, the drummer boy who died before you meet these characters. But he's present constantly in the play because of this, they're carrying his drum, sort of, which then gets passed on among the boys and becomes their drum on along and down the line. So with each of the characters, I had a deep sense of what their history was, but everybody's got secrets in this play, and where they don't always divulge their secrets, and they don't trust each other enough to share their secrets. So as their stories unfold, really has more to do with how much they've grown to trust each other and how much this little family among these three brothers is evolving at any point.
Now you're going to get to see them full costume, full lighting, the whole shebang, and this is a scene in the corporal's tent. Doug, anything you want to give to the audience in terms of background at all before they see this?
I'm just stunned by what a remarkable program this is. As to the background of the scene that we're about to see the General Cutter scene?
No, we're about to see the one where they're in the corporal's tent and we learn that George Washington is able to read.
Okay, so we've only just met George Washington, and he's an African-American slave child who went on the Underground Railroad and got lost. And he ends up in the midst of these other two drummer boys. And I wanted to his name is George Washington, I wanted to give him a surprising amount of education and integrity, considering where he's come from the plantation. And so you see that in the scene.
The food's not good, but it's food. We could transfer you to a unit headed north, but you earn your keep in the Army, and I expect we'll keep you drumming. 5th Division, 4th Regiment, 3rd Platoon, 3rd drummer boy on reserve.
Don't want to drum, sir.
But I already heard you drum.
I don't want to be a drummer boy. I can't fight no man's battles. That's what I believe. That's how I was raised.
Well, you won't drum. What good are you?
I can read.
You cannot.
I said I can read. I can read.
You can read?
I taught myself, sir.
How did you teach yourself how to read, Mr. Washington?
I was slave to the new little master. He was 4 and I was 6. Come time to learn reading and writing, and I was right beside him. But black with a book in your hands, you get a licking with red pepper and salt rubbed in the wounds to learn you good. So I'd wait till night, light a pine torch, and get a hold of that Webster's blueback speller, teach myself under the blanket.
Very resourceful, Mr. Washington.
Thank you, sir.
Now prove it. Let's have you read something.
Read what?
Oh, I got this letter. It was in the jacket, sir. It's a love letter.
Oh, we shouldn't have, sir. I know. That's all right, Mr. Jackson. We take our comfort where we find it. Read the letter, Mr. Washington.
From the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
Dearest Amanda, I witnessed a painful sight this week. The shooting of
That's not a letter.
That's what it says.
No, sir. It starts, my precious only darling.
Let me see the letter. Dearest Amanda, that's what it says. Keep reading, Mr. Washington.
I witnessed a painful sight this week. The shooting of 2 federal soldiers tried for desertion.
Desertion? What's that?
Running away because you quit, because you're yellow.
Oh, scared?
Yes, wanting no part of it. They run. Dishonor.
found guilty of desertion and sentenced to be shot.
Shot? They kill you for it?
Kill you dead. Infantry marched in formation surrounding the prisoners. 8 men shouldered 2 empty coffins waiting for the execution.
No, that's not what the letter says. That letter's a love letter from her to him and all about love. Jackson read it to me.
I made up what I read, sir. I don't know how to read. I see. Mr. Washington, how's your penmanship?
My mom always said I write like a girl.
Then I think you'll do just fine. My secretary is bound to read my correspondence and write my replies. Could you do that?
Yes, sir.
There you go. Secretary and third drummer boy on reserve.
But, sir,
Do you like this elephant, Mr. Washington? Huh?
Yes, sir.
I made it myself. Here, keep it.
Thank you, sir.
You gentlemen are dismissed. Good night.
Thanks very much, gentlemen. I'll ask us to raise the lights again, and let's all just join center stage here, guys, to come on over. Now, Doug, you and Carol stay on that side, and I'm going to give you guys the handheld mic, and we'll share. And we're going to start by just giving the actors the opportunity, obviously, to introduce themselves. Then we'll go to Brian for some questions they might have about the scene of either the actors, the playwright, or the director, and then we'll keep going. So take us away, Rufus.
Hi, I'm Pat Mullen. I play Rufus.
My name is Robert Moore, and I play George Washington.
I'm Mark Holzum. I play Jackson.
And Nick Correa. I played Corporal Wilkes.
And obviously, you just saw the scene in the Corporal's tent. There's another actor who's part of that scene, but she becomes even more pivotal in the scene we're going to see in a minute, so she's going to be joining us after that scene is done. Before I start to ask these guys questions, Brian, Ohio, do you guys have a question you want to ask the actors or the director or the playwright about the scene?
Do you feel like you have to portray yourself as your age that you are now? Or would a drummer boy be younger?
Oh, that's a great question, and something that I think is really important to the nature of the play, because the drummer boys were 10 or 12. Obviously, it's adults who are performing that part, and so they're asking you in terms of like playing the part at your age or thinking about playing the part, you know, truth for a 10-year-old or 12-year-old, and I'll give my thoughts about that in just a minute. But Rufus, you want to start?
Sure. One of the things that we talked about when we started doing the show was that we weren't going to play the roles down in any way. We were going to play them as we would, but obviously it's important as we go along to keep in mind that, you know, I'm playing a 10-year-old, and, you know, sometimes kids react very differently to things, like about that letter. You know, at first I wanted to put a little bit more subtext and read a little bit more into things, and then I realized, well, no, he's just mad that Jackson's lied to him about the letter.
Carol, from a director's perspective, did you give them certain instructions?
Well, one of the things that I think is important is that when we're playing young roles, there's nothing that's dumbed down. And Doug has written such complex characters. True, they are 10, they're 11, they're 12, but they have life experience that's as big as it gets for them. And this is a really big story. The stakes couldn't be higher for them emotionally. And I didn't want these actors to pull back in any way from their investment in the integrity of those characters. So that's where we started. I said, if you think of trying to go backwards in your brain and be less smart than you are right now, that's a huge mistake, and you're going to do these characters disservice.
And they definitely do not do them disservice. I had the opportunity to watch the matinee performance this morning, and I get the sense that they're young people, but in no way do I get the sense that it's an adult attempting to play a kid. You know, Lily Tomlin being Ernestine in the big chair. There's no sense of that at all. It's very true to the nature of the character. Brian, another question for us? Go right ahead.
How does a producer or an actor let the themes of the play go into the audience without the audience feeling like they're attending a history class?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, let's get it, first of all, from the actor's perspective. Pass the mic to George Washington. We'll let you answer this. The question deals with, like, how do you make sure that the audience feels it's a play, it's drama, it's theater, it's not just a history lesson? Since obviously there's all sorts of history attached with this. And we do get, I think it's fabulous how the exposition of the Civil War comes into the play dramatically. But talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think that, you know, it's our job as actors to really live inside of the realm of the play. You know, the year is 1863. It requires taking out, you know, a lot of our modernness, I guess I would say, and really imagining those circumstances. What's it like to stand next to a fire? What's it like to be barefoot walking for miles and miles? And so it requires a lot of research and, you know, intense study of what life was like at that time and portraying that.
And Doug, from a research perspective, the playwright's perspective, obviously when you watch the play, if you have knowledge of the Civil War, then you get historic information. It's very accurate, it's very true, but you don't want it to come across didactically, just like exposition.
Oh yeah, because mostly, I mean, my participation in this room is to tell a story and to be true to the story, to serve the story. And I stumbled somehow in storyteller manner, I stumbled upon this kind of juicy story about these three drummer boys who are jockeying for position amongst themselves, but faced with this, you know, as you say, like the stakes couldn't be higher. It's a life or death stakes that hit a kid when they're 10 or 11 or 12, and they're unmoored from their families. They're removed from their families, so they have to think by their own wits. So that part of the story was the focus of my concern, but then I got to decorate it with all of this details that I picked up from research about the Civil War. It's probably a much more modern story because on another layer, I was just trying to talk to young people about what it means to be a young person in war, because we can pick up any newspaper and read about how children are participating in wars around the world right now. So I was probably coming at it from sort of a more modern perspective and trying to awaken people to what that must be like for kids around the world and how we feel about it ourselves and how it's part of our own history.
An email question came to us, Doug. What's it like to see it performed?
Oh, it's great. It's great. Today was great, particularly because my little boy got to see the play and he's 6, and that was particularly thrilling for me. But, you know, I have to say, I don't know if other playwrights are the same, but it's very much a pinch me moment when you are young and you want to write and you hope that people will like your plays and do them, to a moment when the play has acquired its own life and you're sitting out in the audience watching the audience watch the play. But then even as I say that, I got involved in the story and I knew how it ended. But I got involved in seeing the choices that the actors made and the story as it played out and moved by some of the history of it.
It comes across beautifully. You notice the actors are getting in position. Before we start the next scene, we've had this email question come across, and I want to make sure we don't forget it because it's come multiple times. People are already intrigued. How do they find out about getting tickets to the production? Let's deal with that right now.
Oh, let's do. Missouri History Museum is handling the tickets. They can be purchased by phone, online, or at the History Museum. mohistory.org, I think, is the website.
And it's in performance through the end of the month?
We will be at the History Museum 6 days a week through the 29th of January.
And in addition to the scene you just saw, you're going to see this scene as well with General Cutter, who we referred to earlier when we looked at that surgical set. So remember those surgical tools as you watch this scene happen. We'll sit down.
Which one of you is my dead man?
General Cutter, hush.
Speak up. Who's it going to be? Which one weighs the most?
Me?
Bang! You're dead. On the stretcher. You two, move. On 3, lift. 1, 2, 3. Look what happens. We're raising the dead. Put him down. Enough out of you. Rest in peace. What did we learn? If they're alive, put them down gentle. If they're not, not. Let's try walking. 1, 2, 3, lift. 3 steps towards the river. And 3 steps towards the hills.
Where do we put him down?
Well, that depends on whether he's alive or dead. How you feeling, soldier? Dead or alive?
I thought I was dead.
I'm giving you a choice.
I want to live.
He's alive. Bring him to the tent. Let us work miracles. Do you boys understand what you have to do?
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, sir. I know what the soldiers call me. General Cutter. You're afraid to say it to my face. You boys know how I got that name? Don't answer. I'll tell you how. Because we've all got a difficult job, and we've all got to do it.
Yes, sir. That's the answer? Hush.
You, take this stretcher back to the field hospital.
But, sir, ma'am, I can't leave my drum.
Take your bed and walk. Leave your drum right there.
But I'm supposed to stay ready.
Who is your superior officer right here, right now?
Yes, sir. General Cutter. Thank you
you all very much again. We're going to ask the actors to come back in. Thank you very much. And Brian, we're going to go to some more questions for you guys. Susan, I'll have you join me right over here and take the microphone because the students haven't had the chance to meet you yet. Introduce yourself to everybody.
Yes, I am Susan Rash.
And in addition to General Cutter, you obviously play the foot soldier we saw before, but you play other roles as well.
I also play the role of a character named Annabelle, who is a homeless young woman who's lost her home in the war in the South. And I also play Mama, Rufus's mother.
From your character's perspective, then I'm going to ask you the question from your perspective, then I'll ask it from your perspective. Why do you think the character doesn't answer his question? Or why you don't say why you're really called General Cutter?
Well, I think it's one of those unspoken things. We all know what happens, but I think it's also her opportunity to say, I'm doing this because I have to. You know, you have a difficult job, I have a difficult job, we all have a difficult job to do in the war, and it's not pretty and it's not pleasant, but it has to be done, you know, and it also introduces the idea of who she is and why she's there without, you know, being too graphic about it. I mean, we get the idea, you
Doug,
know?
from a playwright's perspective, obviously you could have chosen to have her get very graphic at that moment in time and
Yes.
describe something.
But, well, I know that she's a nurse, so she has a heart, and she's talking to boys. And in that moment, she, you know, pulls the response a little bit to be appreciative of what they're doing and to tell them as much as they need to know and to acknowledge that they're all in it together.
And did you do a lot of research into women's roles in the Civil War? We had that email come across in terms of women's roles, and why did you think it was important to put a woman in the play this way?
Well, General Cutter, she's a bit of a fabrication. I mean, she's got a lot more power than, or she carries herself with a lot more power than women necessarily had in culture at that time. So she's a bit of a playwright's fantasy, but I also wanted to show how women functioned in the war, and the way that they functioned was in those hospitals, and those hospitals were particularly grim.
Okay, Jackson, I'm going to give you the microphones because you can answer this email question we got about that particular scene.
Okay.
You're being carried on that stretcher, and so the questioner wants to know, one, does it hurt if you actually land? And did you guys practice the fall, you know, and all that good stuff?
Well, trust is the big thing here, and I of course trust everyone in the cast, 100%. Yeah, we practice it a ton. It's part of like our fight call. There's a fight that happens in the scene or in the play as well, and so. Yeah, we rehearsed it a bunch of times, and I always felt very. I'm in control of my head hitting and in control of the rolling. So I mean, it's me and it's them, but trust. Yeah.
Someone who didn't get to be here wanted to know from the actors if there was something specific they did to prepare for a strongly military-centered role or part.
Oh, that's a very cool question.
Yeah, there's a great series on the Civil War, the Ken Burns series on the Civil War that taught us a lot about, you know, those 4 years. We're very fortunate here in St. Louis to have some great historic landmarks that I had the privilege of visiting. General Grant's historic home that he would come, you know, during that time and stay here. Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery was very eye-opening. It taught me a lot about the community that military was. You know, that's kind of grim. But and then also just you know, doing a lot of reading and just, you know, how salutes were and the, you know, how they marched. And you guys want to add something?
Jackson wants to add something, I think.
Well, we're drummer boys, so it's not necessarily like learning how to use a gun or being that kind of military thing, but we had to learn how to play. We're all actors. None of us were percussionists, so we had a drumline coach, and we learned how to drum with proper form. It's what is it called, traditional grip. So it's not like the matchstick where you've got those. You know, you've got one hand that goes this way. So that was a pretty tough process.
I'm not going to let you I'm not going to let you just stop at that.
Go ahead.
Guys,
go ahead.
would you grab some drums? Because I think it'd be a wonderful moment.
Okay.
Yeah, let's grab. Keep talking.
Keep talking.
Yeah, about what you're talking about. Let's grab some drums. We can hear what they sound and what they sound like. Does that work for you? You just step aside.
Yes.
Okay, because
Not
I don't know if you can drum
not in General Cutter's uniform.
Yeah. So we all have musical ability, and we knew how to keep rhythm and all these things. But we've never drummed ever before.
I'll take that from you.
Want this?
I'll take that from you so you can put your drum on. So you can put your drum on. You can put your drum on. because I want the students in Bryan to make sure they get the opportunity to see it. And obviously, when you look at the size of the drum, these are replica drums created for the production or found as a result of somewhere you went?
We rented these from the Eckerd Theater Company in Florida, the theater that commissioned Doug to write the play.
But in terms of size and scale, they would be the same that would have been used, obviously. George Washington, is it heavy?
It's not heavy. It's a little uncomfortable because it does sling to the side. But I'm a little more used to it than I was at first, but it does hurt here sometimes. Also, trying to hold the stick like this, like a chopstick, it does hurt here, and then after practicing for so long, your shoulders hurt, but you know, you get over it. I can't imagine what the boys during the Civil War had to go through just carrying it. Like, I mean, we carry it across the stage, they carried it across state lines.
Nick, I'm going to give you a chance to answer a question because we haven't heard from you yet, and let you guys, since you're the corporal, let you direct what we might hear here. So talk a little bit about the practice you all did for drumming, and then what would you like to play for us as an example?
In the practicing, we did a certain number of exercises with Terry every day, which we continue to do now when we warm up. And Terry used some of those exercises to actually compose the music that we're playing at the end of the show. So the whole show builds to this drum line at the very end. So I think what we'll do now is just do some of those exercises that we work on. And Mark, would you lead us off with the first one?
Very much. Bryan, Ohio, any questions about the drums as well as we continue to have the conversation?
Not about the drums.
What question do you have then?
I'm Paige. I have a question directed towards George Washington. How did you prepare to play a former slave with an education, and how did you perceive a 10-year-old's mind would have felt during this particular time period?
I did a lot of personal soul searching about, you know, my personal opinions on things such as war and youth involved in war, and also the history associated with, you know, why the war began, what was it fought over, and all that. And that helped a lot, taking, you know, a stand on, you know, what I really believed in. I had never really taken the time to address those issues before. And then I did some research, you know. I did research on both sides about what it would be like for a runaway slave, you know, to be on his own, especially a boy of that age, a boy like as smart as George Washington to, you know, cook a frog and, you know, swim in the Ohio River. I actually got to cross the Ohio River in my car as I was coming back to St. Louis, and that river is choppy, you know, like, and so it's a lot of imagination. It's a lot of imagination, imaginary circumstances, and, you know, just combined with personal opinion. I hope that answers your question.
Great, and Bryan, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'll go to you guys for a final question before we end up some things right here. Bryan, is there another thought in your mind right now you'd like to ask?
You have one for the playwright.
Yes, someone who couldn't make it wants to know, for the playwright, did you compose music?
You wrote the lyrics,
I wrote the lyrics.
But the music was composed by?
Lee Aline. He's a composer out of Tampa, Clearwater, Florida.
And had you worked with him prior to this moment in time?
No, we've been matched up for the opportunity. The theater had a lot of confidence in him, and I met him, I liked him, so I went with it. It's a very careful partnership when you write with a composer, but I would send him a set of lyrics, and I've written other songs, so I have a sense of the structure of writing lyrics. And then it's a leap of faith, because the composer will often have to move lyrics around or suggest other solutions, because composing songs involves a certain amount of mathematics. And he would send it back to me, although it all happened over the internet.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, MP3 files, back and forth. Isn't that interesting? And there was only one song that, I don't think Lee would mind if I told the story, there was one song that I pushed back and said, no, this doesn't sound right to me. And it was the glory song that they sing when the three boys are singing about imagining what it will be like if they die. Mm-hmm. And the first song that he sent me was very ironic and dark and a little sarcastic. And it had these values that I thought sounded more like 18, 19, 20-year-old soldiers and not the boys that I had in mind. So I made that observation to him, sent it off to him, and he kicked back another one.
Well, the music works beautifully in the show. I think it works beautifully in the show because you get a sense of the time period as well as the drama that's happening. We've had a couple of email questions come in specifically directed to your character, Susan, because they've seen you in 2 scenes now, one where you get to stand and one when you get to act, so to speak. And we've had this conversation before, but talk a little bit about the nature of reacting and listening and what it's like to play 2 scenes very differently that way.
Absolutely. Well, the biggest difference in doing a scene like General Cutter, where my character really drives that scene, and then a scene where I'm standing back as the soldier, is just the amount of responsibility within the scene in terms of line memorization and the kind of energy that is required. But as an actor, you're always listening. That's your job, really, in any scene, regardless of what your character is. And so there is the same amount of listening that happens in both scenes. So, you know, even though what I do in each scene is so different, I'm very focused, just as focused as the soldier listening in that tent scene as I am in the General Cutter scene, where I really have to move that scene along.
Very good. Carol, if you join me up here, I'd like to end with you just having a little bit of an opportunity to talk about, from your perspective, summarizing just the importance of the show, what excites you about doing it, and, you know, just the chance here. You've got 30 seconds to say that to me, Carol.
Well, you know, we've talked about how high the stakes are for the characters, and I think the actors would agree with me. The stakes are very high for us, too. Doug doesn't let us off the hook for a minute with this play. The demands of playing multiple roles, of playing these drums, of keeping the fire ignited under this story, so it's relentless, that it just drives to the end. I think that's the thing that's thrilling every single day.
Carol, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Doug, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm so glad. And to the cast, thank you as always. It's been great. To the Missouri History Museum and everybody here, thanks. We're glad we could be joined by Daniel Gonzalez. Come to that exhibition on the Civil War in Missouri. It's absolutely fantastic. Go to mohistory.org to see some artifacts from the exhibition and all sorts of education materials they have for teachers out there that you can use. Go to metrotheatercompany.org to find out more about what they do as well. We'll be seeing you at the end of January for a program with Holocaust survivors. You'll have the chance to ask your questions of those individuals. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.